Unwarranted music opinion. Unwarranted music opinion. I don't care if you don't want to hear my opinion about your album.
Welcome to Unwarranted Music Opinions, the show in which three music fans choose an album and then we force those albums into each other's ears and reconvene at the end of a week.
Yeah, my ears hurt.
To discuss what happened to our ears over the past week.
Why would you do that to my ears?
I'm Jacob Lindberg. I'm here with Brian Courtney.
Hey.
And Chaz Jenkins.
What up?
And this is an unthemed episode where any album is fair game, so let's just get right on ahead with it with Brian's pick.
This is the final regular episode, too.
It is, yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
man.
We're coming to a close here.
Next time we record, we got to have lists ready and everything. It's surreal a little bit. This is Explosions in the Sky, 2007 release, their fifth studio album. All of a sudden, I Miss Everyone. They're a post-rock group. Post-rock is a genre of rock that kind of aims to be ambient in nature, but generally speaking, you know, if I had to give you the blueprint for a post-rock song, we have these, you know, pretty guitar melodies that eventually lead to these huge crescendos, more or less. Typically how post-rock works. There are variations on that, and there are some bands that are, you know, pioneers of the genre and through experimentation or just maybe even a Spiderland situation where they sort of just lay the groundwork for that genre.
Yeah, or talk. I think that the crescendo element maybe has become a core element of it initially, and I would still just categorize post-rock as just rock instrumentation used in a non-rock context.
Right, the
like
song...
rock instrumentation, but it's taking more cues from like, as far as compositions and the way that it's written, like a classical piece.
That was my first thought. Like first post-rock album I heard, I was like, this reminds me of classical music. Now this is released well after the peak of post-rock, well into the genre's, you know, lifespan, which started in the like late 90s, early 2000s.
I would say early 90s, but it's definitely morphed and changed in form. I mean, you have like a post-rock quote-unquote album in like the late 80s with Talk's later releases, which sort of see them. They were once like a synth pop kind of sophistopop sort of new wave-ish kind of band, and they became a lot more atmospheric and slow and almost a little bit jazzy, and just had these sort of long, more extended compositions that weren't really a verse-chorus situation, and that's kind of what you see in post-rock going forward. And that had vocals. And this album is completely instrumental.
And most of the post-rock I've heard, aside from sampling, hasn't really had much vocal work at all.
Yeah, it's definitely evolved in that direction.
Which I think for the better. I personally really love the instrumental stuff rather than the vocal stuff.
This album is, you know, it's good, but it grew off me quite a bit. I picked it when I was still really sitting at a high score on it. It was really growing to be one of my favorites I'd ever heard. And then, man, fourth or fifth listen.
What's the major issue? I'm wondering if it's the same reason as me.
The major issue is that it's kind of trite. We're at 2007. We are, you know, well over a decade into the genre, and maybe this is coming only a few years after a point at which this is what post-rock is sounding like to most people, or this is what you think of when you hear post-rock.
I think that Explosions in the Sky kind of defined this sound, this kind of derided as crescendo core, but they kind of defined that.
I want to meet the people who make these names up for genre.
It's just there's certain corners of the internet, but anyway.
Hold on. Nerd in his basement going, it's called crescendo core.
Yeah.
But hold on, I think that's actually pretty funny.
Their 2003 release, The Earth Is Not a Cold Dead Place, it was probably the single biggest, most well-known post-rock album of its time, and maybe even still is. And that album has a lot of the similar elements as this one. You have these longer instrumental tracks, the guitar that usually there's not a lot of, I guess, movement in what's being played. Like the changes from chord to chord are usually not that fast. Like they're just sort of intensely played, and they kind of build to a climax before becoming quiet again and then building again. And I think that album does it fairly well.
But is that their first record?
That's one of. I don't think it's their very first album. But I think that album does what it does a lot better than what this album tries to do. For me, personally, when I first heard this album, I enjoyed it, as a background listening experience. I thought the production was really nice. The drumming, I thought, sounded great. And I thought that just having it on in the background was a really nice experience. However, I listened to, some cracks started to form. I definitely enjoyed the first track on this album. The Birth and Death of a Day. I still enjoy that album.
Is one of the
track a
most
lot.
beautiful pieces of music I think I've ever heard in my entire life.
I think
It's
it builds really
fantastic.
well to that like drum. Like the drumming on that track pretty much floored me the first time I heard it. I thought it was really great, and I still really enjoy it. I think it builds nicely too, and the track's only like 7 minutes, so it doesn't exactly take a long time to get there. It's a nice little dopamine release,
It's
I guess.
so hard for music to make you feel like you're floating. I feel like when an artist gets it right, it feels so awesome, and this song nails it. I just feel like I'm floating, like on an eagle or something, and the whole world is burning under me. It's crazy.
I think the album does do a good job of invoking visuals. I still kind of
Yes.
get that feeling, especially on tracks like So Long Lonesome and Welcome Ghosts. But the biggest issues with this album is, one, the production's a little gimmicky.
Define gimmicky.
Quiet to loud.
It's
There are some parts that are so quiet, like in the build-up to, that you can barely, unless you really turn up, I have trouble paying attention to the sounds. And then when you get there, they're super basic, and they're really just serving a purpose instead of trying to sound as good as they can. And then when you get to the crescendo, it's like, to put it in decibels, it's like going from like -20 to -3, and it's not very good.
Here's my issue. And it's like every other song on this album, and there are only, 6 tracks here. Every song, with the exception maybe of Welcome Ghosts, is like a very faint shadow of the first song to me. I feel like the first
Yes.
track,
Yes.
it's a stamp. This is what this album is. However, it's significantly better than every other song.
Yes.
So it feels like they're trying to recreate the magic.
It starts too strong.
And they just never match those heights ever again. And it gets to the point where even though each song individually isn't like bad,
Yeah, there's no bad song on here.
it becomes so, and for me personally, like just boring, like aggressively boring, to the point where, every time that the song gets about 3/4 of the way in and it gets quiet, and then the intense drumming starts up again, and then you get the guitar that sounds the same on every single song, and the guitar tone that's just the most unimaginative, like just mind-numbing guitar sound that they use on every single song here. The album becomes less than the sum of its parts, because it's just, you get right after the first track, you get 5 in a row songs that all just kind of make me roll my eyes once the crescendo comes around. It's not nearly as powerful as it is the first time. It feels like the musical equivalent of like an Oscar bait movie, where on its face you're like, oh, it's deep, it has these messages to it.
Oh,
but
that's
when you start getting into it and you start analyzing it a little bit more,
Fantastic analogy.
there's like nothing under the surface. There's nothing to dig into. There's nothing that on repeated listens you are going to discover about this album. I would rather watch paint dry almost than listen to this album again.
That comparison is like damning.
It's, God.
Now,
and
I don't feel as strong as Jacob.
Yeah,
does.
I'm not bored by it.
Because I'm never bored by this. I think my biggest issue is that it's kind of a slog.
It's only 42 minutes, but it is kind of a long
It's true,
42
and it
minutes.
really starts to hit me after we get to that 13-minute song. Up
oh
to
my
that
God,
point,
that song is an absolute just, it's like walking through a pool of mud. You eventually get to the end and you just collapse because you've spent so long sludging your way through it. This album
The first half of
it
that
took all of my self-control to not just skip tracks on my last listen. Like, because we were doing it for this podcast, I was like, yeah, I got to sit down, I got to take notes on it. But man, getting through that third and final listen of this album was hard.
Your comparison of like that every song wants to be as beautiful and stunning and imaginative as the first track is on point.
I don't know if I agree with that fully. I think songs
No,
like...
because there are times where like in It's Natural to Be Afraid or What Do You Go Home To, where I'm like, this sounds, that like melody or riff, that sounds like it's in the first song.
I think
totally hear
songs mirror one another. I don't think they all like mirror or kind of are similar to the first song, but I do think like Welcome Ghost and What Do You Go Home To are similar moments where they're kind of having, the quiet little build up, like the like the, and they're going
Yeah.
for similar things. I think across the album, Yes, the tracks are assembled exactly the same.
They blend together very well, though.
I like the
which
flow
I really
of this.
like.
I like the flow of this record, even if it is a little long. I do kind of like. I think it's assembled well, even if it's not as mind blowing as I thought it was on my first 3 lessons.
I feel like this. I think Jacob's complaint of saturation 1 would work here too. If you would just cut like a minute or 2 off of each of these tracks, or maybe not the first one, I think it would help it immensely.
It would help it a little, but I
think-
don't think it would help it to the point where I start to really enjoy this album.
Well, I feel like for you, it's you get into the song and then it keeps going and going. And you're like, it's not doing anything different. I want to skip. You know?
And the thing is, the appeal to this album that people talk about when they gush about this album, and I've read a few reviews and I've seen a few reviews, is the kind of emotional catharsis that it offers. But the emotion to me completely fails to translate, except for on the first track, and it kind of gets to the point where I'm like, yeah, put this on the soundtrack to like a young adult action movie during the climactic scene, and it would fit in perfectly. It's about as subtle as that. And that it's completely not subtle. It feels like it's beating you over the head with this emotion that it's trying to force you to feel. It feels like just a catharsis pills. That's what I feel like this album is trying to market itself as.
I mean, you're not wrong, but I just don't think it's that bad.
Well, I think that they've managed that kind of appeal considerably better on The Earth Is Not a Cold Dead Place, which I don't love, but I still think is really solid. And I think it's just down to the compositions, to where if they had made songs that actually demanded my attention, then I would be okay with this, but right now it feels totally without warrant. Like I can't bring myself to care about the emotions, and you know that they're trying to get you to feel them because of the track titles, which are so stereotypical, like pseudo deep, pseudo philosophical. It's
natural to be afraid.
It rubs me the wrong way, and it's not the image of this album that I end up really disliking. It's not like I'm going to score this low because of the image of the album rather than the album itself, but it's kind of just like the cherry on top. If it was just track 1, track 2, track 3, track 4, like just, no track titles at all, then I still would feel the same way just because of the experience I had listening to this thing, it was just difficult to get through by the end of it.
I don't think so. When you talk about the track listing, sure, maybe the titles are kind of, I just didn't read into it that way. For me, what they represented was, and sure, post-rock has the emotional element where they want you to feel something, but I don't necessarily think that they were trying to beat you over the head with an emotional kind of catharsis. That's just not what I was getting when I was listening to it. For me, the weakness of the sounds comes from the songwriting itself. Like, this album really could have used some bass or something, just something to kind of just dense up that production a little bit, and I think the album would have been leagues better. But what really makes it still really good for me is when I interpret the track listing, I saw it as them trying to tell a cohesive story with very vague titles, and just using the cover of this album to kind of help interpret that, like some sort of apocalyptic scenario.
I would agree, yeah.
And for me, the fun is in, using the visual of the album to impose visuals over the sounds of the track. Similar to how, ambient music, because post-rock takes cues from ambient, I think, to kind of invoke imagery, or how people are like, there's a type of music listener who, and this isn't really me at all, who when they hear sound, they prefer to just hear sounds and interpret the sounds and impose imagery over that. Because for them, it's kind of a creative thing, I think, and also, that's just their preferred way to listen. I'm a vocal performance guy. You guys know this by now. I like lyric writing, I like songwriting with lyrics. John Prine and Kieran J are like some great examples of that. But this album was a situation where I can sort of impose those visuals over just a sonic backdrop. And I still think it does that pretty well for me when I'm listening. But I did get to a point where I kind of had to stop because I was hearing it too much and I was just disliking it from overexposure. But I am glad I listened to it more because it really isn't as mind-blowing as I thought it was, especially for a post-rock record. I think when you put that genre, it's a post-rock record from 2007. And once you hear it and you have that context, because no album exists in a vacuum, it's like, oh, okay. It's like, it makes me just want to go back. It makes me want to listen to more post-rock still. I think more so than maybe listening to a Godspeed You record does, just because their records are just, they have so much more packed into them. But, it just makes me want to listen to other records And I can only really see it maybe remaining where it is or going down with time. It's still a good record. I still enjoy this record for the most part. I just wish there was more in the production, man. I just think it's so gimmicky. Like, and it just murders it. It really just murders the score. Like, if there was some more thought put into these compositions instead of this over-concentrated effort to make it cohesive and trying to make it sound cohesive, you end up just getting songs that are samey and redundant. Yeah, it really hurts it. But I still think it's really good. You know, I still enjoyed it quite a bit.
For me, I mirror your guys' complaints, but just not as heavily. For me, they're nitpicks more so because I was enjoying myself a lot when I was.
Did you get the catharsis each time?
For the most part, yeah. But there was times where it really started to slog and sound a little samey to track one, like Jacob was feeling, where I was like, let's wrap it up. You know,
that is so true on Catastrophe and The Cure. That I swear that drum is the exact same.
It's the same crescendo, the same build, the same 3/4 of the way through the song, it gets loud again.
Now that being said, I still like the way, I do still enjoy that track, and I do like they realize it's a callback. I'm certain they realize it's a callback. Because it's exactly the same.
To me, it just seems like a band trying to relive their glory days a little bit.
Well, I have no context, so this is my first introduction to this band, so I don't have that, but
the glory days were earlier on this album, and they're trying to relive earlier on this album.
Yeah, true, yeah. But I think that just, when it's good, it's really good in my eyes because of just how beautiful and stunning and like the visual imagery it creates as you listen to. And I feel that throughout the album. I think it's just that track one is just so fucking good that that really should have been like the halfway point. I feel like they should have started with a different track to kind of ease you in because it starts like I think some albums have this problem where it starts too good and the rest of the album just does not live up to the expectations. A great example of this is I can't believe I'm referencing this again, but Weezer's Ratitude has an excellent opener that kind of makes you think, you know, oh, maybe this will be kind of a quirky, like kind of really poppy album. And woo, off a cliff, you know. It's the same type of thing, just not as bad for me because it's so stunning and visually beautiful. But once we get into Welcome Ghost, and especially into track 3, It's Natural to Be Afraid, it's just like, man, what happened? Where did we go? But I mean, despite all that, I still really enjoyed it. And we'll probably come back to this album for sure because of just how it's a great background music to play. But I think I would enjoy it if I were to just put it on and listen to it. I don't think I hate it as much as you guys do.
I don't hate it per se. Like, despite my complaints, I still really enjoy it.
Yeah, I'm probably more on Brian's side in that regard.
Just wish there was a little more to it, and I'm way cooler on it than I was before. Like, this is, like, I still think this is a decent album. Like, if you want to get into post-rock, I think this is a decent place to start because it is very basic, and you'll kind of, and you know,
I think you should start with The Earth Is Not a Cold Dead Place.
If you were going to start with them.
Yeah, if you want to start with, or even like this brand of post-rock, because I think that album, again, it does what this one does, but the songwriting is there.
I just think this record maybe, even if it doesn't age well in most people's eyes, the more they dig into the genre, I think it's like in some ways, a blueprint for this brand of post-rock, and it's extremely basic. It might be a little easier to get into if they're, you know, new to listening to music. And that's the thing about this album, too, another complaint, it really doesn't reward an active listener at all.
And it ends kind of weak.
I like the closer actually quite a bit. It's probably
good,
my second favorite.
I feel like it doesn't end on a good note where it's like, yes, a solid, you know, full album listen. We made it. Excellent. It just kind of ends kind of like, I guess that was it, you know.
We've complained a lot. It's still a good record, in my opinion. I still enjoy it quite a bit.
It's worth a listen, at least
sure,
once,
I think, you know, there's going to be a contingent of post-rock fans who love this record as well. I'm feeling like a light to decent 7. It's enjoyable. I do think it's good for the most part. It's just a couple of major complaints really knock it down from being great.
I'm feeling a strong 7 to a light 8. I feel like out of the three of us, I liked it the most. Mm-hmm. But I think that's just because I don't have the band's earlier work to compare it to. This is my first introduction to the band, and this genre I'm not too familiar with. I've heard many things like it and similar to it, but I mean, I was blown away by the first track. The rest of the tracks, while good, just don't live up to the hype, so that kind of brings it down. It's also a bit of a slog, which does not help it. I feel like if you were to just cut a couple minutes off each track, it would help it beautifully. Don't really have a production issue. I feel like I'm always in the minority here. I really don't notice that stuff, nor if I do, it doesn't really bother me.
Right.
I feel like that's just artist intent in my eyes. I feel like there's only rarely moments where I'm like, yeah, some studio head came in and just ruined this, you know. But as it stands, it's an album I'm sure I'll come back to and really enjoy. But yeah, what could have been, you know, this could have been a fantastic release.
Yeah, I think it just lost potential is the way to put it.
Yeah, especially after that first track.
For me, this album is incredibly formulaic. I initially thought that I was going to give it a relatively positive score because I think that each track on its own works fairly well as a background listening experience. But the more I listened to this thing all the way through, front to back, and it is meant to be listened to that way because of the way that it flows and the way that it's packaged, it just started irritating me to the point where I wasn't just ambivalent. I was like actively annoyed when I listened to this album, and it was difficult to get through. And I can't justify giving an album a 5 if I just, like, I'd rather go back. I'd 100% rather go back to Billie Eilish over this, because that album at least had its highlights, and it had some variety, and it had some, you know, ideas that maybe they didn't always pan out, but you could tell that she was trying something. This just feels like a bland rehash, and yeah, I'm gonna go with like a decent strong 4 because
we haven't had a 4 since Nicki Minaj.
It's a lot of fun to hear. I like getting it's fun. Low scores are fun.
Because I mean, you know,
no,
it's
they're
just
not.
They're fun to listen. Fun to listen to.
Shut the hell up.
Yeah, this thing's a 4 to me. I just can't. I can't with this album, or really this style very often. The album that I've chosen is by Modest Mouse. It's their 1997 release, The Lonesome Crowded West, and it's a bit of an easy pick.
The year I was born, I forgot about this.
Me too.
97.
That's like a bucket list thing for me.
Dude,
like
some good shit was like Colma was released in 97.
No way.
Mollusk was released in 97.
Woo!
Hanson's debut was released in 97.
I love how you put Hanson in with all those other ones.
Hanson.
Anyway, yeah, it's a kind of an easy pick, but I chose it because I have been listening to this album for a very long time. I've probably listened to this album more than any other individual album throughout high school, at least, maybe even full stop. Like, I know that I've listened to a lot of Red House Painters, and I've listened to a lot of Cocteau Twins and Sun Kill Moon, but man, I've heard this album. I wish I started using Last FM earlier to see just how many Modest Mouse scrobbles I'd have.
I think that with so many records, Kendrick especially, I mean, God, like Good Kid, Mad City, and we're going to talk about To Pimp a Butterfly. Dude, it's easily the album I've heard the most, ever.
So, yeah, I used to listen to this album all the time. Chaz, we were on the speech team together, and like on the way to and
you would
from,
talk about Modest Mouse all the time.
On the way like back from speech tournaments, I'd listen to Lonesome Crowded West. It kind of just like represents that era, but it also has aged, you know, well.
So this is the music you would listen to. This makes so much sense. I'm like, what's Jacob listening to right now? And it's this album. Oh my God, this makes so much sense now.
Now, to be fair,
he's doing the cockroach.
Now, to be fair, it's a really, really good record. I would go as far to say it's fantastic. And it's for a couple of reasons. I normally don't fall in love with records. We were talking about this before the show. I kind of prefer high highs to consistency because, like, I mean, you know, just like when a track peaks for me, like it's amazing and it's way more worth it than having an album experience that's super consistent. That's not the case here because while the highs aren't as high as some of my favorite records I've heard of all time, it's just so consistently good. I mean, just track to track, not a weak moment. Wow, not a wasted lyric. And all the instrumentals, sometimes the instrumentals maybe feel like they're serving a bit of a purpose. They're not exactly killing it for me, but they're never bad. They're always good.
I don't like that last thing you said.
I think the strongest thing about this record is its conceptual nature as a piece of art. Lonesome Crowded West, perfect title. Love the themes on this record. Because not to, you know, explain the joke, but it's not like Western themed. Lonesome Crowded West. He's talking about moving out to a new city, as far as I can tell. And when you get there, it's like lonesome crowded, the two words that are kind of, you know, opposites, but they're joined there to demonstrate how it's like you're surrounded by all these strangers, you don't know anyone. and West being the location where he is, I guess. But I think it really is like a perfect album title, and the concept is like watertight. He doesn't fail to demonstrate any aspect of this. He goes into depth with them, but not through like on the nose
and through
lyrics.
just like the most Isaac Brock of metaphors and allusions and just phrasing, like the way that he writes lyrically. Like he's gonna touch on a lot of topics that have been talked about in music for a long time, like consumerism. There's a lot of talk about like the rapid urbanization of rural areas on this album. Mm-hmm. And, just like the general meaningless to existence, I think he talks about a bit on this album. And that's the kind of thing where, if it's a bit too on the nose, which like Father John Misty maybe got a little bit too on the nose with these similar topics, Isaac Brock, just the way that he delivers the lyrics and the way that they're written, they're often funny and dark at the same time. And to me, this is an indie rock album through and through, but there's a lot of post-hardcore and, by extension, hardcore punk influence, especially in Brock's vocals. And the instrumentation gets very aggressive, like right off the bat with the first song here.
Right. It reminds me of Against Me now that I'm thinking about it, and their earlier stuff where, a Disco Before the Breakdown type of feel where we're getting, the hardcore punk delivery. Wow, I just made that connection just now. That's crazy. I didn't hear that before. I think the introspective thoughts and like the kind of self-analyzation on this record is a direct result of him being in this lonesome, crowded West. Everything is tied to the theme of this album in some way. Even the numerous allusions to driving, and drug abuse, addiction, and those are the darkest, most like harrowing moments on the album. Like, and they're really
it's all nice on ice.
They're pretty subtle. I think they're pretty subtle.
They are.
Yeah, the way it kicks off is awesome.
Okay, so I want to talk about my favorite tracks first, and then I want to kind of take it a track by track thing.
Can we each name like our favorite, except for Jacob, whose favorite track is all of them?
Go first.
Yeah. Probably.
Spoiler alert, songs. Is Jacob going to give this a 10? We'll find out.
Next week on Unwarranted Music Opinions.
All right, Brian, go.
Probably Cowboy Dan, the opener. Oh, now I'm blanking on every track.
You gotta say the name of the opener because it's so good. Teeth like God's shoe shine.
Yeah, I have trouble saying shoe shine.
That's the kind of like language that you get in like the imagery. There's a lot of religious imagery here.
Yeah, there's some, the illusion, there's so many things to pick through on this album. It's over an hour long, so it's not a slog. It's a pretty easy hour, but Trucker's Atlas as well is great. Fantastic track. Trailer Trash, Doing the Cockroach, Jesus Christ Was an Only Child, and my favorite on the whole album, Convenient Parking. Whew, great. Just it's the most straightforward song on here, I think, because the songwriting on here gets pretty complicated, and not complicated. It's just
They do a lot of interesting things with song structure on this album. They might start with the chorus instead of with the verse, and then only do the chorus once before going into a series of bridges, like on Doing the Cockroach.
Or they'll do like 3 verses and then come back to the chorus they began with, and that's the last
There's
time
a lot
you get
of like intros and outros, and they're just doing a lot of like on the first song here, Teeth Like God's Shoe Shine, where it starts, it just beats you over the head with aggressiveness from the very beginning. Then it goes into a quieter moment.
Yeah, it's really
There's a
pretty.
lot of that on this album.
What are your favorite tracks?
So my favorite tracks are Teeth Like God's Shoe Sign, Convenient Parking, Lounge, Doing the Cockroach, Bankrupt on Sailing, and Styrofoam Boops. And my favorite track of this album, Trailer Trash. I adore Trailer Trash.
Yeah,
How did I know that you would love Trucker Atlas, you predictable shits? I was like, so we have a 6-minute track, a 7-minute track, a couple 4 minutes, 5 minutes, a 10-minute track.
It's 11 minutes actually, Cass.
I wonder if that's going to be Brian and Jacob's favorite song.
It's not mine, but it's
I'm being
great.
oppressed.
Actually, you naming a lot of the ones that you named are my favorites as well. So if I'm looking through here,
those are like the jewels of this album.
You know, Cowboy Dan?
It's okay.
Damn, that's a bad opinion.
So the 1, 2, like every song on this album is close to my heart, but the 1, 2, 3 punch of Doing the Cockroach into Cowboy Dan into Trailer Trash is unbelievable. The just Doing the Cockroach, Cowboy Dan, Trailer Trash, like the lyrical content, what's going on musically, like the catchiness of Doing the Cockroach and that guitar riff, like so many amazing riffs on this album. Cowboy Dan, just the character that it's portraying, and then Trailer Trash, as soon as that like last 2 minutes of a song, that musical outro. That's freaking catharsis. Take notes, Explosions in the Sky.
Don't be
That's
mad.
how you do catharsis.
Come on.
These
don't-
albums are
amazing.
decades apart. Relax.
I'm just saying, like, they're
don't-
1 decade apart.
They don't need that smoke, man. They didn't.
And then I would say my favorite song on this album for a very long time, and one of my favorites still, is Bankrupt on Selling.
That's a great song.
It's a little 3-minute, like...
acoustic ballad.
Yeah, it's the
It's
only...
kind of a nice bit of brevity.
Yeah,
It's like no other song sounds like that. And then it leads right into a fantastic closer. Styrofoam Boots / It's All Nice on Ice, all right? Holy Jesus. That is probably the second best song on this album.
Holy Jesus.
I
that's
might
good.
agree with you there.
Because it's just such a solid closer. And
it's like it almost starts with like a folky kind of romp kind of
And
sound.
I like how
Yeah.
his vocals, like through the whole album, his vocals are kind of like in the front, but on that one song, it's in the back.
And it
Have you
mirrors-
did you notice that?
It mirrors the first song as well, where we transition to a much quieter and way more forlorn. I don't think there's like any sort of like hope on this
All right.
record.
I don't like Trucker Atlas
That's fine.
for two reasons.
it's a divisive song.
well, okay, because
The jam is long.
I don't want to say this album slogs, but it kind of does for me, and it only starts happening in Trucker Atlas. Because like the first half of that song is pretty solid. It's not my favorite, but like I like it. A lot of these songs I like, and then a handful of these songs I love. This is a good like, a lot to love and a lot to like. It only just starts to really slog for me in the back half of Trucker Atlas, where it just repeats like a lot of the same kind of like melody. You know what I'm talking about? When it
I just
kind of-
think the jam is good and I enjoy it so much. I
it's
don't
fine,
mind.
but I really start to get bored. I start to feel like how Jacob felt in Explosions of the Sky right there. But thankfully, it picks up a little bit with Bankrupt on Selling, and then just we're back to the top with the closer. So it's just that one moment where I'm like, wow, okay, if the rest of the album's like this, we're in trouble.
Got to mention Bad Luck as well. Great song. Great little break. It breaks up the album nicely. It's the shortest song here, I think. And it's just,
Easily, yeah.
Yeah, it's like 2 minutes or something.
Yeah, it's you can really see the punk influence on that song.
Oh, yeah. In length and every.
Gotta talk about Heart Cook's Brain with the turntablism.
That's a decent song. I wasn't expecting turntable.
That's
like,
maybe the one moment where I think the lyrics don't. I like the metaphor he's saying. I just think there are a lot of stronger ones on the album. And I think some of the allusions that are more subtle.
It's not
and some
my
of the-
favorite song.
Yeah, in terms
But
of
it
the
pick-
song, it's not my favorite. I
But
like.
when we get back into convenient parking, I
I kind of like the lyric a little more where he's like, what's it? He's like, my brain's my heart's the long stairs. I kind of like that more just from an artistic perspective. I think my Heart Cook's Brain, where he's like, my heart's the coal. What does he say his brain is? My brain is something and my heart is the coal. I get what he's saying there. I do think it's a good metaphor. I'm not knocking it for. I just think in the greater context of the record, I just think there are some stronger metaphors, some stronger
Brain's the burger. My heart's the coal.
some stronger artistic twists. I just think that one is maybe the most on the nose this record gets. Still good. Still enjoy the song. Not a
But
song
we
I
get
don't
lines
enjoy,
on
like
that
I
song
said.
like the match of a century, absence versus thin air.
Yeah.
I
No,
mean, that's-
I'm not saying that song lyrically. I'm saying that one lyric is the only time I feel like the album is just a touch on the
It's
nose.
stunning to think that this is the same band that made Float On. To give some context, I'm as noob and normie as it comes with Modest Mouse. I've heard Float On, and that's it. So coming in this release, it was very interesting to see their roots and what they would go on to do. But I was telling Jacob before the episode, there is a lot of Float On, like, sprinkled through this, with, like, that would become that sound of that song and album. Because I can't remember which song it is. I think it's Lounge, where the guitar, like, goes, like, choo, 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 choo. And it's the tone of it sounds just like, 2000s Modest Mouse.
I'm interested to hear what you enjoy so much about Lounge. I adore that song, but it has, it's a little longer. It has sort of more of an instrumental.
True. I think
outro.
I like the instrumental a lot more than I do Trucker's Atlas, and I love the piano. I love the lyrics on that are very nice, and it's very catchy. It's just beautiful. I like Convenient Parking into Lounge is a solid moment for me on the album. Trailer Trash is just is like that's the high.
And we got to talk about the lyrics on Trailer Trash. They're easily the most personal, I think, on the whole album.
Oh, yeah.
I feel like he's definitely addressing someone, and the lyrics kind of they talk about his childhood living in like a trailer park, eating snowflakes with plastic forks and a paper plate, of course. And then you get the chorus where I think that he's addressing like either his mother or his parents or some parental figure, where he's saying, and I shout that you're all fakes, and you should have seen the look on your face, and I guess that's what it takes when comparing your bellyache. So, comparing your bellyaches, like trying to one up in terms of like,
That
I
line-
have it worse than you.
My favorite way to put it is playing America's Next Top Victim. Like
Right.
That line about I hope I graduate from high school is
I like
is
that. I just like
fantastic.
that he points out the toxicity of that argument. That a lot of people, like, I felt that way in high school. So like when he says that, it's like, yeah, man, it's completely stupid. Like I wish you could go back and tell these kids who feel this way, like, hey, you got to stop because it's okay to feel this way, but your toxic reaction is only going to fuel this terrible. It's going to ruin your relationships.
Yeah, and then you get like an later perspective from him saying, and it's been a long time since the moment where he shouted and called them all fakes or
Yeah.
whatever, which agrees with this watch of mine, which I love that line.
Yeah.
And I know that I miss you, and I'm sorry if I dissed you. So he's like saying, hey, sorry for the way that I acted when I was younger. I know that you had it hard. I know that it was a difficult.
It's emotional, honestly.
Living in this situation and raising kids,
Because you don't really have an appreciation for that as a young kid. Because you're in that situation too, and young teens tend to be selfish, I think, for better or worse. But yeah, it's a pretty big emotional moment because I found
And then
myself in a
just the
situation.
In the middle of
outro,
the
the
album,
music,
too.
like the bass line on the outro, and the way that the guitar sounds as it just overcomes everything. It's just very loud. It's very overwhelming.
The bridge in Teeth Like God's Shoes Shine is
it's really- I like-
fantastic.
Let's all have another Orange Julius.
Yes. Oh, it's one of the more blatant tracks as well. I like the interlude, or not the interlude. Sorry, the bridge a lot. Where he's talking about standing in the grass. What song is that?
That's Cowboy Dan.
Yes, love that one. Love the bridge on that song.
Polar Opposites is kind of a forgettable song for me, and I think that's just the placement of it.
Not my
I think
favorite.
it might be.
but
Yeah, it could have been placed somewhere.
It's just
different
after
in the
getting
album.
through 11 song into that. I mean, but like I said, it picks right up with Bankrupt on Selling. But Polar Opposites is kind of a track I forget even exists at
So,
that point in the album.
we get a lot of allusions to addiction. Was he knowing a lot about this record and about the artist, Jacob? Is he under the influence while he's writing
He
this
was
thing?
probably on meth.
Okay.
On ice. In
Yeah,
quotation
which
marks.
is
Nice,
what the-
all right.
And alcoholism. Oh, the
Yep.
numerous allusions to alcoholism and to driving as well, which is
There's a lot of illusions of like traveling and of like essentially driving through these areas out west and like Oregon and I believe he was from Montana. Trucker's Atlas driving up to Alaska, driving down through California, and just seeing the urbanization of all of these previously untouched lands. The malls are soon to be ghost towns.
Yep.
As they're sprouting up
just
everywhere.
predicting the kind of the end of the world. Another sort of moment where I think of Father John Misty a little bit with like, kind of using the apocalypse to demonstrate the futility of this. But I don't think it's so much that as it is just, one day this mall's going to close and people won't want it anymore.
Yeah.
And how quick to forget people are and how quick to just, pitch something to the side, which is probably a result of him going to this new city, this huge big city from a small place, and just seeing this. And this is how, he's basically just using this album to process all of this, whether the thoughts are, after he's been there, when he's just arrived, or when he's on his way. It's a great record. I think I'm glad it lives up to the hype. I would love to hear more of his discography and just see where this kind of ranks in among all that. But as far as just a record goes, I'm feeling like a decent 8. It's probably only going to get better from there. I do love this record. I love the cohesiveness of the theme. I think the theme is executed pretty much perfectly. I just think a couple songs maybe pale in comparison to others, but hard to complain. It's really, really well written.
I'm feeling a decent 8 too. Like there's just moments for me that, don't elevate it for me, but you just as it stands, like it's an album for sure I'll come back to and will enjoy listening to, despite like my complaints, which in like the grander scheme of things are more just nitpicks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think this album is 100% without flaws, but the flaws that it does have in that, I think that it's a little uneven around the middle of the album. However, I do think that actually helps make this album a really fantastic road trip album. I think it's one of the best road trip albums there is, and Modest Mouse has always had driving. Like their first album is called This Is a Long Drive for Someone with Nothing to Think About. And you have a lot of allusions to driving and like, obviously Trucker's Atlas. But when you're driving through like the Midwest and kind of seeing all the scenery, like Highway 9 or the AA around here, and you're listening to Lonesome Crowded West, it kind of, the way that it flows, it gets quieter right before Trucker's Atlas picks up. And as you're just driving down the road and the jam on Trucker's Atlas is going on, and then eventually it gets to Styrofoam Boots, and it's been a little quieter with Bankrupt on selling into Styrofoam Boots, and then the drums crash in and scare the hell out of you.
Yeah.
And you might be, when I was on a speech bus, I'd be listening to the album and exhausted, tired, nodding off a little bit, and then we'd be almost back, and then crash, the drums on Styrofoam Boots kind of wake you up and scare you a little bit because they're so loud.
There's some songs, I can't remember what song it is right now, but there's a song where there's a horns honking that I love to listen to in the car. Every single time it happens, I'm like looking around, I'm like, oh God.
Oh yeah, oh my God, that happened one time when I was listening. I was like, what was that? It sounded like a phone went off or something. I was like,
stuff that's like real life samples, man, they're great, but like sometimes they get me and I'm like, what's happening?
I think that the music on here, just instrumentally, like the drums are incredible. The band is not only tight, but they're just going in so many directions. Like there are hardly any verse, chorus, bridge, chorus structures here. And there's so many great dynamics where it gets faster, then quieter, then louder, then softer, but it's done so well and it flows so perfectly.
And it's crazy to think of like how the sound would just change more as the band went along. It's a lot of the new stuff though, it's kind of a shame.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of like their most recent albums. And the album after this, The Moon in Antarctica, is another fantastic album. They're first on a major label. So this was like, they were still an indie band, and you can tell based on the production values here, it just a lot of this, and I love this about the album, it feels like they just stuck a microphone or two in a room and just recorded live. It has this great live energy to it.
It flows very nicely.
But it still sounds quite nice. It does, you know what I mean? To me, it sounded studio produced, just it sounded underproduced, and I mean that in a good way. It just feels like no one really touched it.
Right, yeah, it just sounds like these could be sort of demo quality, tapes, just with a slight edit to them. And the way that you mentioned, like, no one touched them, there's that moment on Trucker's Atlas where you have that weird sound that comes in.
Yeah, like it's
that was a mess up in the studio that they thought sounded kind of cool, and they just decided to keep it.
I had to play it back to make sure it had happened and the song hadn't messed up, similar to like that Kiro Kiro Bonito song where it just goes nuts at the end and you think your computer's crashing.
Yeah, so this album is definitely a 10 out of 10, no question. It's so far up there.
No, it can't be.
How is that? Hey, cut that. He doesn't mean that.
Yeah, there's no way. It's got to be like at least a strong 5. Like, there's no way it's a 10.
Yeah, you said there were complaints. How can you have complaints and it's not as a 10?
You lying bastard.
Chaz, cut all this out.
This album might even be like tied for number 1 of all time. I've said before that if anything could dethrone my number 1 of all time, it would be this album. And listening to it more recently, it's just like,
see, after he listened to Andrew WK, like it's just so hard for him to decide.
So few albums age as well as this. Like I've been listening to this album for so long now, and all of the themes and everything still remain relevant in the way that they are discussed on this album. It doesn't, like some albums that I listen to haven't aged as well as this, but this one, it just feels more and more relevant. And this is an absolute classic in my opinion, and anybody who's into indie rock at all really owes it to themselves to check out this album. It's
essential indie rock, and that's in the greater context of indie rock. And we talked about the last record in the greater context of its genre, and the greater context of indie rock as a whole. This is essential, and will probably just remain essential. I agree that it probably will just continue to age better and better, because the fact that it's from a decade ago is hardly, you can hardly tell.
So the album I picked for the final regular episode is a meme. What better way to end than on a meme? It is Floral Shoppe by Macintosh Plus. Give a little context, that's not even the actual artist's name. The actual artist who made this album is called Vectroid. She is a kind of underground, very sort of internet-known electronic artist. This is her 11th studio album, but it's the first released under the name Macintosh Plus. She's released so many albums under different names besides her actual artist name. It's kind of a crazy rabbit hole. But Floral Shoppe is considered to be the pioneer album of the internet-loved genre of music vaporwave, which we've mentioned before on the show, way back when we had Joe Lewis on the show, and he brought us some synthwave music, and I mentioned that I am a big fan of vaporwave, and that still holds true. It's a genre that I very much love to listen to and put on in the background and just to vibe with a lot. So coming back, and I listened to this album when it came back all the way back in 2011. So it's been quite a while since this album was released.
Did not know this thing was this old.
Yeah, it's pretty old. When
Like, that's how you know, like, talking about how we were, like, post-rock originated in, like, the early 90s, like, it's crazy to think how far back genres go. I did not know Vaporwave was 10 years old. You couldn't have told me. I thought it was, like, maybe 6 years old at the most.
I think this album has aged well before we get into discussion, just because of, like, how it's influenced a lot of genres to come and how music's changed and just a lot of the type of emotions that music can garner people, if that makes any sense. But coming back to it, I do have some issues with it. I remember enjoying it a lot, but it was very interesting to come back to it after all these years since I had first listened to it. So let's get into it.
So what we've got here, basically Vaporwave as a whole, which this is like my first experience with the genre.
Same.
You get a lot of, it's a very sample-based genre, where you get a lot of like 80s pop soul, stuff like that, like cheesy 80s and like late 70s music.
Slow down.
You slow it down, you slap on some reverb, and that's the stereotypical idea of Vaporwave. It's just those kinds of samples distorted and changed in a way fit for the internet age and the 2010s. This album, I am completely foreign to the meme culture that surrounds both this album and the genre of Vaporwave
Which
itself.
is why I was really interested to hear what you would think about it, not knowing any of the context the album would go on to create and it did create when it came out.
I know of this album's reputation, and
Especially track 2.
for several years, and I think when it came out, it wasn't really very critically acclaimed by big publications or
Needle
critics.
Drop gave it a
However,
4.
recently, it's getting a lot of
Pitchfork re-reviewed
reacclaim.
this as we were coming to talk about it. So they're listening. Fuck you, Pitchfork, for stealing our idea, first of all.
It's getting some reappraisal for sure.
Yeah, it is. It's crazy. And, you know, I'm a memer. I enjoy the memes quite
I'm
a bit.
shit poster on this show for sure.
But, and I'm aware of some of the memes around Macintosh Plus. I've seen the album cover listed in some people's favorite of all times and even their favorite ambient music of all time. You know, I've seen memes surrounding Vaporwave. I'm aware of, like, Simpsons Wave, you know, which is Vaporwave
The
music.
best genre of music of all time.
Put over clips of The Simpsons. Like, I don't know if it's self-aware. It seems self-aware.
It's definitely
It's very
self-aware.
self-aware. No, it is.
It's just you know,
You sound like a grandpa right now.
but, you know, like those memes, I was curious about the album because of the memes. And, you know, I don't think it's defined at all by the meme culture that surrounds it.
It's a lot darker than I would remember.
Yeah, I heard this album described as being very, you know,
Upbeat.
extremely. I heard the term like soulless, very, very like without any kind of integrity. Like I see people saying like, oh, they just sample a song, loop it, reverb it, slow it down. That's the song. I don't think that's really the case at all. I feel like a lot of people probably got caught up in the fact that the album cover's weird. For the time it was. Right now, like, you can see shades of this sort of surreal atmosphere in a lot of things.
Especially how far internet humor has come. And
Yeah.
just the culture surrounding it.
And I think that this album has a lot more going for it than people might say or that was initially thought of it. And I think, you know, like you mentioned, Pitchfork recently re-reviewed it, gave it an 8.8, and maybe it was the first time they did review it, so maybe it wasn't even a re-review, but I think people are turning back to this album and saying, hey, maybe there was something more here because of just how much it influenced and how much you can see and hear this album, and not just in electronic music, but in a lot of different kinds of music, like all of the different samples and things that are going on, the experimentation that's happening in different genres right now. And like you mentioned, it's way more dark and atmospheric and ambient than I was
only
expecting.
Like 2 songs that are like actual true, in my opinion, Vaporwave. That's track 2 and I think track 6 that are like kind of at that, you know, soul pop, you know, slowed down kind of thing where it just very emotional and you just vibe with it. You don't really like, you kind of just put it on in the back.
I don't know,
but
to
a
me,
lot of these are like dark ambient stuff.
I think that track 4 also fits in with what you described. It's almost like it's the one song on this album where I'm like, yeah, this is a slowed down synth funk song. I don't think it's bad. I think that it's actually a really interesting take on the genre of electronic music to make, as you said, like ambient or new age sounding music using samples of music that you would never think in a million years would be used for that purpose. It's a really unique idea, I think, and maybe, I don't think Floral Shop's probably not the very first vaporwave album ever. I know that
it's one of the first.
were ideas. I know that Chuck Person's Echo Jams was like a big album. I haven't heard it yet.
I've seen that reference too.
Right.
I've even seen people kind of like, and this is a weird thing where when a new genre develops, people will kind of credit people in post. I've seen Brian Eno referenced in vaporwave.
And you mentioned Brian Eno, and that's actually one of the comparisons I'd like to make is this album and the fact that it's such a simple, there's not a ton happening here, but it's a unique idea, and it's, I think, done very well.
It's engaging.
And that's kind of similar to the way that Brian Eno's earlier ambient albums were, where maybe it wasn't taken to its final point where you get artists like Aphex Twin. It's a lot more simple and condensed than an Aphex Twin album, but it's a unique concept and done very simply, and it just sort of makes a statement. I think this album is kind of like that. You could compare this to Music for Airports, that ambient Brian Eno record, because this album, it makes that statement, and I think it does it really well. And I think that the idea that it's just songs that have been reverbed and slowed down is wrong, because there are a lot of little moments where you can tell that she's deciding to loop a certain moment. And I love the moments on this album where it loops something and then it loops it again, but it's slower or faster, and then it goes back.
There's one song that reminds me of it's a tad industrial where she loops and he goes net 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 net, like the CD skipping. That's really cool.
And it gives it this sense of unpredictability almost, despite the fact that a lot of the tracks here are pretty repetitive. There's almost a slightly foreboding quality to a few of the tracks here, and unlike on the first track, I love a little horn loop that happens on the first track. The it's kind of an interesting idea. It's taking these past genres and it's distorting them, and it's just a very unique vibe to me.
And that's what vaporwave is. One of the core emotions is its cynicism. There's a very cynical quality. And I like that you mentioned foreboding. That's pretty spot on for what this album and genre kind of indicates. But I feel like the later vaporwave is more of the upbeat nature to it. I kind of like how dark this album is. And it was so strange because when I first listened to it way back in 2011, I remember it being more what vaporwave's known for. I don't remember it being this dark
I think that might have something to do with the culture that would arise from vaporwave and the fact that a lot of it is surrounded by memes and things. I think that the general discussion going on around that album might have had that quality to it, where people were saying just saying it's a joke kind of situation.
Because track 2 was everywhere.
It's the biggest meme. It's the genre-defining song in my opinion, but despite
it's actually a great song on the album.
Yeah, despite the meme culture of it, it is the best song on the record. I actually would go as far as to say it's great. It's not the only great track here either. Track 6, Echo, that's
I think my favorite
pretty fantastic. It's just super engaging. This is really what I like out of my ambient music. This is definitely a subculture.
You know what it reminds me of, Brian? It reminds me of Clouds from the Teletubbies album.
Now, there are a couple weak moments on the track listing. I think the album definitely staggers to a halt. I think the last 2 tracks are the weakest. They don't really do anything for me.
It ends very abruptly, and I kind of like that, and I don't like it. I'm very torn.
Here's the thing. The album has a couple of dual qualities. Sometimes the ideas are cool. I like the sampling on tracks 1 and 2, and then from there on out, I don't think we really even get any more sampling from there.
Oh, we definitely do.
Vocal samples, sorry, I should say.
Yeah, it definitely takes a more atmospheric and ambient turn towards the middle. I actually like that about it a lot because it kind of, you get hints of it early on with the more dark elements, but then track 5 is pretty much a dark ambient song. The way that there's already very low piano chords, when they're shifted downward and to even further down, it's just kind of unsettling, and you can tell there was a song there somewhere, but it's been distorted and changed
and here's the thing.
Obscured to where the original composition and the original structure is lost. And I think that's such an interesting way to repurpose all of this stuff.
It's a little akin to Plunderphonics in that regard, because I think they take the samples here and make them different enough. Like, they've completely recontextualized them and redefined the sound that they are. So, I think it's, just because it's sampled, that's a dumb and basic reason to put this thing to the side. Because if they're recontextualizing the sound, and completely taking that sample and twisting it, making it new, and making it sound good and palatable with respect to the sample, which I think was done here, and with respect to artistic integrity and creation in general, I mean, yeah, they respect all of that. I really don't get why people...
why it got so panned when it was released.
I don't think it was panned for this. Well, it was panned for sampling. I just don't think I think that segment of the music listening audience is just always going to grind my gears, because, I mean, their gripes are not going to be consistent. Either you allow all of this or you allow none of it. Because, I mean, you might accidentally... There's so much music at this point, you're going to find yourself accidentally playing someone else's song at some point. So if you sample it, what's the difference? Because you're going to be inspired by other artists. You're going to take influence from other artists. You're going to be, when in your initial music writing and trying to create songs, you're going to be using other artists' structures and song styles, and maybe even practicing their songs to, refine your playing and your songwriting skills. So why can't you use a sample to kind of work your way in, or to just make art in general? What's the problem? And the problem with that mindset of, it's someone else's, it's not original.
When you sample it and twist it, it is your original. Like, that's...
I just hate that. Yeah, you are completely flipping it.
We wouldn't have Beastie Boys, Paul's Boutique with that
That's
logic.
Like the ultimate, maybe not the ultimate, because there's like Introducing from DJ Shadow, but like, as far as the amount of samples the Beastie Boys are using and the way they're using them to construct basically the entire beat of every song.
We wouldn't have an album. We wouldn't have anything.
Yeah, and this album is considerably simpler than Paul's Boutique in terms of sampling. Usually it's like one song, and it lets it kind of run its original melody a little bit, but it changes it enough, and it skips through it and back and forth and does enough little things that it's just a totally different identity than the original track. And I do like how this album flows. I think it works really well as an album listening experience, because it flows into tracks 5, 6, and 7, which are all slightly longer, more ambient, but they get a little more light near the end of it. Like, track 5 is pretty much dark ambient, but then tracks 6 and 7 are almost like a video game soundtrack sound.
One of the samples is... Are you guys familiar with the video game series Turok?
I'm not.
Yeah, the dinosaur game?
Yeah, I believe it's one of the OSTs from the Turok 64 is sampled.
That track's a 10 now. Wow, Turok. Dang, back with the Duke Nukem games? Oh my god. Woo! That's like a long time ago. It's good. It's a good album.
I wasn't expecting you guys to like it.
Don't love it. I have a few complaints. Some of the ideas feel like just ideas, not really fleshed out or anything. And I think the last 2 tracks and the way the album closes leaves a lot to be desired.
Well, you can tell, like, this is definitely like the blueprints of what the genre would be.
Sure, but I just even, and that's cool. I think that's cool that it spawned,
And it's crazy thing, like this artist, Vectroid, does so much music. Like, this is the first
she
release
pulled
under
this album
name.
from Bandcamp.
What?
She pulled this album from Bandcamp because of how it was received, and it's like it's on YouTube, sure, but it's not her official upload. Like,
which is stupid. Like, that's ridiculous. But yeah, it's her. Oh, I said 11th. I'm sorry. It's her 9th full release, and she still has releasing so much more music after that on her own name and other names in general. So I can kind of see why it would be like some things aren't fully fleshed out, but to come up with this like on a whim and what it would go on to create, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I think that this album is going to be well received further into the future we go. I think that already we can see the critical consensus shifting more positively. I don't think it's perfect. I agree with Brian, and in some points I feel like we have the base idea and I need a little more from it. And I actually kind of feel that way about Music for Airports, like I mentioned. That's not one of my favorite Brian Eno ambient albums. I prefer his stuff that he would put out in like the early 80s, where he's doing a little bit more. However, this was a thoroughly enjoyable experience all the way through.
Yeah, never wanting to skip. Never,
that's crazy.
Never really wanted to turn it off. Never, doesn't feel like a slog. It's short enough. It's good.
And I'm glad I listened to it without any of the context, just as the music itself.
I think the meme culture doesn't do anything to take away from it. If it's really affecting it that hard for you, I just think, That's fine. I get that, but
You're
really,
wrong.
It's
You're stupid.
It's not that hard to view it outside of that context, honestly. I mean, you can look at it, without attaching it to what became of it, because it took a long time for that culture to kind of fester.
And I think that it has been festering, to use your ill-chosen word, Brian, for a while now. And you can see that the influence this album has had, not just in music, but in internet humor in general, just like the surreal, weird nature. Like, you look at the album cover and it doesn't really seem all that weird anymore.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
So I'm going with like a strong 7 on this album.
Oh, wow.
I think it's a really solid
Called
release.
it. Jacob asked me.
I mean, I was almost at like an 8 on this thing. I just think I just love
Hell yeah.
I love the creativity here, and I always love it when an artist, and like I said, I appreciated this about Billie Eilish, even though I didn't love that album, like the risks and the ideas and the unabashed just like trying something new. And I think this album has that, and I think that it works out really well. I especially love the longer ambient songs. It's just some really great ambient music, and I love the fact that the source material of the samples is so unexpected, at least for the time that this was released. So unexpected that it got a huge backlash for even daring to use that kind of music.
I can't believe that it was lambasted. Like, maybe it's just, the way I've been listening to music and where we are now, but like, I really don't understand why this thing was pretty much across the board panned and now is only like posthumously getting praise because of what it did. I think that's kind of...
Posthumously means that the person has died.
I mean, Yeah, I used it wrong.
Gotta learn some words.
I used it wrong. I'm sorry. I was trying to use it to describe that it aged. I think the fact that people are reviewing it so long after it's released, and it really just because of, hey, look what it created. And I just feel like that's so disingenuous, honestly. Like, I see these new reviews and I'm like, what was so wrong with it when it came out? And why now suddenly is it like, yeah, like, I get that sometimes you go back to a record and you think better of it, but like, it's a really drastic change because this thing was hit pretty hard. Like, people were not into it.
I think that there's a good amount of people like myself who just hadn't heard it until people started talking about it again.
Sure. And I mean, and I guess maybe I wouldn't have heard it either. I just don't, like, hearing it now, I don't get why it was so, panned or why it was rejected. Is it one of the best of all time or maybe even of that year? I mean, like, probably not, but...
And then the genre as a whole, like, there's some really great stuff that the genre's created. It's cool to see where its roots are from. I'm blown away by just how ignorant some people can be about.
Well, I mean, if you dislike this album, then that's fine.
Well, I mean, yeah,
Right.
It's not for everybody, but just
to jump on the bandwagon, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and not give it a fair shot.
I bet half the people who were panning it when it came out didn't even listen to it.
Well,
they probably just heard the second song.
I mean, we can't make any statements like that because we don't know, but I do think that the meme culture kind of gave it a bad name, maybe.
There's
like,
a
people who
stigma.
don't like, there's that like level of like, this album isn't being serious, so it shouldn't be taken seriously, whereas I think it should be taken seriously, and I do think it was made with a serious artistic intent.
It's nice to listen to. Yeah, I'm just, I could ramble about it because I just get kind of confused and angry when I see all the reviews that are coming out now just talking about it again. I get where maybe they were coming from, but I just don't understand, even for its time, what was so, like, if you knew about sampling, which had been around for years, decades before this, I just don't get where the complaints are coming from.
There was that, just, I guess, myth that of the way that the album was created, and people were saying how little effort that it took or takes to create vaporwave, like just how the samples
does
were...
effort equal quality? You know what I mean?
Yeah, and it doesn't. It doesn't at all.
I just don't think they were... I just think they had this, I'm kind of strawmanning here a little bit, but it's like a mindset of like rapping fast equals rapping good. That's how I kind of think about it.
Sure.
And that's why I get kind of upset about it. It's just because it's like you're completely dismissing this person's art on this one thing. Like, if you could think about it in a different way and then you still come away not liking it, I just think, people should have been more open-minded to it. And then it's not even something that's great. I'm feeling like a light 7 on it. I think it's good. But there are some ideas that aren't fully fleshed out. I think it kind of staggers off. It's a little short. I think the best ideas only show up a handful of times on the record, but they are really good. I love the second track, through and through, and Echo as well, track 6. I just, I don't know. I just don't get the problem people had and why suddenly now it's not a problem. You know what I mean? I just don't get the complaints.
I guess it's just kind of a ripple effect. One person who is paid attention to gives this album a listen on a whim, says, hey, this is pretty cool. People who are fans of Vaporwave, and in 2019, the genre is still going strong, huge underground following, are pointing to this album and saying this is kind of the progenitor of it. And it's not the first Vaporwave. I'm not saying that like every single Vaporwave artist is taking cues from Macintosh Plus.
Right.
But it's the biggest name. I mean, it's obviously the biggest name as far as a Vaporwave album goes. So when people are saying, well, let's re-examine Vaporwave, this is the album that they're going to go to first and see, well, was there something to this? And I think there is for sure.
I'm happy. Thank you. Yeah, I really loved it when it came out. Again, I wasn't like paying attention to a lot of music critics back in 2011. Hell no. So I didn't know it had a lot of backlash to it, but like since then I've learned about that. And it just blows my mind because I listened to it when it came out. And I was like, this is pretty cool. Like, I've never heard something like this before. I've heard elements of this, but like this sound and style of music. And I see that it was so cool to hear it when it came out and then hear music that it would soon inspire to make. Like, that's so awesome that I was able to live through that and still am. I do think it's a little long, in my opinion. I think the back half of the album is a little, like, not as strong as the front half, and the middle half is excellent. You know, track 2 is fantastic. 4, 5, and 6 is a great moment. There is a song in the back half, I can't remember which one, that I do really enjoy. I think it's track 10, where, like, the vocal sample is normal, then, like, one part of it shifts down, and it's really cool effect and a really nice moment. I love this genre. I love like what it's created. I love the meme culture on it. I love the actual musical and artistic intent behind it. You know, there's a lot of fake fans out there. I think this is the best album to describe out there. But yeah, Light 8. I think it's a good one. And yes, I ended on a high note. I was worried I was going to come in and people were like, "This
You
sucks."
got Jacob pretty. That might round out the list. That's like, you know,
That might get a
spot.
I was
honorable
considering giving it a light 8.
It might get a spot on the
I
list.
just love the just the thought process and the artistry.
I might get a shout
Yeah.
out. Yeah.
And I agree. And I hate, you know, I'm done venting about it, but just like my frustrations don't affect my opinion of the album at all. I just wanted to put them out there. They're not, you know, they're not directly related to what I think about the music here.
Yeah, but if you like Vaporwave and you haven't heard this yet, you're doing yourself.
It's worth the listen in general. I think
For
it is an
sure.
important album like in terms of our decade, because I pretty much, like, if I love something within the decade, I kind of have a soft spot for it just because I like stuff that's being created, you know, in a time where I can really understand it and like take a look at it critically and use my big boy brain to say, this is very good. But I think in terms of the genre, it, you know, sort of started the fire, to put it, you know, in a weird way, put it in a bad way, I guess. Like, it sort of was the spark for the genre, because even though there's stuff before it, this is the one that made other people want to make Vaporwave, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's it.
Yeah. So our next episode is
our
our
final
last
themed and our final episode. Period.
our last discussion episode. We're gonna have something after that, a little
An epilogue of sorts.
yeah, podcast retrospective type
Yep.
of thing. But
Remembering Jacob's life and times.
yeah.
How Elbow just isn't that good.
But
no.
we'll go in our separate ways. We've got some graduations and things of that nature. But next episode,
Favorite albums of all time.
Yeah, we can't close it any other way. We got to talk about, we got to gush, we got to give ourselves the opportunity to
gonna
do
be
what I did with
long.
Modest Mouse this episode and just rant and ramble on about our favorite albums. So I guess I'll go ahead and say mine. It's Sun Kill Moon. So again, it's almost like a sequel episode. We've already gone through 2 of Mark Kozlik's albums, and Down Colorful Hill and Benji. This is the first Sun Kill Moon album, Ghosts of the Great Highway.
We're doing an artist we haven't touched on the show, but this is an album that it's almost trite to have a conversation about in some ways, but there are a lot of personal reasons that I love this album. We'll get into that on top of why it's just so great on its own. It's Kendrick Lamar's To Pimp a Butterfly. It's like released in 2015. I mean, Jesus, we'll just have to talk about it. It's a rap album.
You know, I love this band. I hate this band. We're doing Weezer's Blue album. It's the definitive Chaz album. It's my favorite of all time. I can't wait to gush about what I love about it and just talk about how much this band frustrates me. but I'm excited.
If you come in here, because I know Jacob's heard all these records. If you come in here,
I have an easy week ahead of me.
Yeah, if you come in with anything less than a 7, I will be so mad. I will be so mad. But I care about your opinion is valid, and I care about you, and I would like to hear what you have to say regardless.
So Blue's a 10 right off the bat, like just so we're clear.
I'm excited to revisit because I have. After our Pinkerton episode, I was so done with listening to Weezer. I was just like, I had let outside opinions kind of inform my view too much, and I felt like I couldn't come up with anything rich. So I was like, okay, I'm just going to step away. And now that we're finally back at Blue, I feel like now I'm at a point where I can have my own opinion about it and like can make my own opinion about it because I'm so far away from,
I will warn you, like, Jacob kind of probably knows this. It may seem like an easy listen right off the bat, but more listens, you find a lot of new stuff.
Well, I hope you remember that when you listen to the 2.5 hours of new music that you have to sift through.
I hope you, when you listen to Ghost of the Great Highway, you
I'm just going to keep listening to Floral Shop.
Ghost is an hour 13.
Ghost isn't, no, it's just an hour.
Oh, just an hour? Okay.
There's a few bonus tracks on Spotify. I'll tell you where the album actually ends.
Go to Rate Your Music as well, and it'll usually tell you what the original release was. But that's it.
This has been Unwarranted Music Opinions, and we'll see you again with our last discussion episode next time. Chaz, we have to say our names. I'm Jacob Lindberg, and I was here with Chaz Jenkins and Brian Courtney.
I've made up my mind.
And we'll be back next time.